Outgoing US President Donald Trump said on Thursday that there will be an orderly transfer of power to Joe Biden on the 20th of January. In a statement, he said that even though he totally disagrees with the outcome of the election, there will be an orderly transition of power. Now, his remarks came soon after a joint session of the US Congress formally certified the Electoral College victory of Joe Biden as the next US president and Kamala Harris as the vice president in the November 3rd election. The counting of Electoral College votes and its subsequent certification, although came after an ugly episode of violence inside the US Capitol, resulting in 4 deaths, wherein Capitol Hill was brought under a lockdown. Lawmakers had to be taken to safe places, gunshots were fired inside the Congress, and also tear gas had to be used. World leaders condemned the unprecedented violence and called for a peaceful transition of power in America. So on this edition of The Big Picture, we will be talking about the transition of power in a democracy and why it's important for seamless functioning of a democratic nation as well. To discuss this, I have with me a panel of experts. It's my pleasure to welcome on the program today Professor Harsh V. Pant, Head Strategic Studies Program ORF, former Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, and Mr. Pramitpal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Editor, Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture today. Ambassador, let me begin the program today with your reaction to what happened in the Washington, D.C. on Wednesday and what it speaks about the transition of power in America.
Well, Tina, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I feel that it was the saddest and the darkest day in America for a long, long time. I haven't witnessed anything like this happening in that country, which is considered by many as the greatest democracy on earth.
Yes.
World leaders have come out in condemnation of the events. Our Prime Minister has also said that he was greatly distressed by what happened. Of course, now Donald Trump has conceded defeat, and it does seem that there will be an orderly transition to Joe Biden and that he will be taking over the reins of authority. But the damage which has been done to America's image and to the democratic system there will take a long, long time to heal. The main reason for this is that the racial divide has become deeper than ever. This divide has been festering for quite some time. And the attack on the Capitol, where even the office of Nancy Pelosi was rampaged, this sort of attack speaks volumes for the sort of violent activities which the white supremacist movement is prepared to indulge in. You know, they were carrying the Confederate flag, which shows that they are prepared to take on the authorities of the United States of America. They stand for white supremacy and everything that it connotes. I think, therefore, that it will take a good deal of effort on the part of Joe Biden to heal these wounds, which have now surfaced in American society, and then come down to the greater business of taking on the challenges like coronavirus, a slumping economy, and international challenges such as those posed by Chinese expansionism. So I think that while on the one hand, the events which took place in Washington, D.C. have saddened everybody who is a well-wisher of America, on the other hand, things could be put behind everybody, and the United States new administration led by Joe Biden can get on with the task of governing America and playing a leadership role towards various questions of a global nature.
Mr. Chaudhary, even though Donald Trump has now conceded defeat, but the damage has already been done, do you think it's too late, the remarks coming from him, too late, the damage to America, the world's strongest and perhaps the oldest democracy, the damage has already been done?
Well, this works on a number of levels. I think the first point is American democracy itself in danger? No, the institutions of American democracy actually functioned well despite having a president who tried his very level best to undermine them and to subvert the constitutional and electoral process. So Trump, as you may remember, after the election in November, began fighting on every possible front to try and get the results overturned. He launched over 60 lawsuits in different courts, and every single one of them was turned down by the judges, including by judges he himself had chosen and appointed. All of them said these have absolutely no merit whatsoever. He then pressured states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, and so on to overturn the results by making, as we know now, private phone calls and public entreaties. None of the state governments backed down. All the electoral officers said, we stand by the results. Then his final stage, his final desperate attack was this attempt to stop the electoral college vote, which is the final formal action under the Constitution to choose the President of the United States, by calling upon effectively a mob attack. But more importantly, I'd also argue trying to get his vice president to block the results, to block the vote, trying to get his Republican Party, his senators, to refuse to support the Electoral College vote, boycott it, or do something. All of them basically refused, except for a handful of the Republican senators and a few members of the House. But the vice president himself made it clear legally he would not do so. You saw the legal counsel of the White House warning members of the staff in the White House if they supported Trump, they would face charges of treason and be arrested and tried accordingly. You saw before this the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miller, I think it is, publicly warning every U.S. soldier that you take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, not to defend the President of the United States. You do not. You take an oath for the Constitution, not for the President, making it clear that the U.S. military would not in any way support the President in his actions. So when this final mob attack, in many ways, I would argue, was an act of desperation on the part of President Trump. So the institutions of America held, despite basically being under the worst attack they've been on from a president since the Watergate crisis during Richard Nixon's time. However, the international image of the United States has obviously been very badly damaged. If you visited the Capitol or the White House in the past in Washington, there have always been some demonstration going on someplace or another, but the police presence is almost minimal. It's just assumed that nobody would ever dare to storm the White House or go to the U.S. Capitol. You could walk personally, people could walk right up to the Capitol building onto the Hill without anybody stopping you, with very minimal police presence. It was all considered a very self-disciplined structure. That image obviously has been very badly damaged, and the fact that the president himself, the president of America, personally was supporting and abetting, if you wish, this attack on his own governmental system is not something that America will recover from for a while. Those images will be there for years to come. And every time any U.S. government gives a lecture to some African or Latin American or any other country in the world about their political process, everybody will look back and say, hey, don't give us lectures. We saw what happened in your country.
Definitely. Professor Pant, a peaceful transition of power, which is in a way effected by fair and transparent election, is supposed to be the cornerstone of a democracy. Why is it that these very democratic norms have sort of taken a beating in a country that has for so long had an image of being a standard bearer of democracy in the world?
See, as you said, for a functioning democracy, for a mature democracy, a peaceful transition of power is almost sine qua non as far as democratic health is concerned. So clearly, for Mr. Trump to try to overturn, this election by various means, as was earlier being highlighted, was an attempt to make sure that his personal ambition gets the better, getting the better of him, and making the trying to make the institutional structures irrelevant. And this has been something that he had been trying to do throughout the last 4 years, where he did not bother to govern through the various structures and processes and institutions that are the foundations of in a democracy. He was clearly subverting them at every level. He was running the government by tweets. He was he was not bothering to take into account his cabinet. The way he was governing was very chaotic. So clearly, in a sense, this was reflective of his personality. The way he thought that he's an outsider who's who has come to change the system and dismantle the system. From the very beginning, this was the narrative that he came up with, that I don't believe in the system because the system has created these problems. And this is what happens when the institutional fabric is repeatedly challenged. And to be fair to both sides of the spectrum, there is also this question that many of his supporters have raised, that look, Russian collusion was talked about at the time Donald Trump was elected. So why not this time? Why can't elections be problematic this time? And this is something that he played on. This idea of what happened before, in the last elections, and how the Democrats use that narrative to marginalize his support base. So clearly, the polarization at the heart of this debate is very, very damaging. And that's why this transition of power and the way it has happened is very damaging to the body politic of America, and especially to its image as an exemplar of global democracy. And that's what I think is going to take a very, very long time to heal. But now that he has said that transfer of power is imminent and that I'm going to go away, that transfer of power would be smooth on 20th January, I think the question would be whether for Mr. Trump, who still seeks a return to politics, by the way, he wants to come back in 2024. I think that has become more difficult now, given the kind of, pushback that he's facing, not only now from the Democrats, but also from the Republican Party, which would be very, very, which would find it very difficult to accommodate his ambitions now that that he has, with what has happened over the last 24 hours and how that has changed the complexion of American politics.
But one thing I would also like to understand from you, Professor, is that Wednesday's incident in particular has brought to the fore the larger question: what led to this distrust in the democratic system of America? Donald Trump, we know he's been claiming a voter fraud, and his claims have been called outrageous as well. He's been criticized for not conceding defeat, which eventually he has now. But if we leave the individual aside and talk about the trust in the system at large, the question is, in an established democracy like America, what led to this distrust over the last few years?
I think that to me is the fundamental question that Americans should be thinking more seriously about, because it's not about Mr. Trump. Yes. Trump is a manifestation of this larger problem that you are underlining. And the problem is that, this has been building up for some time. If you see his victory, over Hillary Clinton, it was reflective of this insurrection kind of an attitude in a large part of American populace, that they don't believe in the system. And that's the most dangerous part, that a large part of American electorate today believes that their system is fraudulent, that their system is not working to their advantage. And I think that's where the challenge lies. How do you cultivate that perception that this is a fair system? It gives it gives you equal opportunity. This idea that in America everyone can aspire to be to the highest office in the land, everyone can go there and be successful, which is something still very attractive about America. But increasingly, that idea has come under question, and that idea for many Americans has come under question. When you go to the hinterland in America, which is the Republican base, and where Trump drew much of his support, I think that is where the questions are being asked. And I think that is why you see Mr. Biden himself trying to incorporate a lot of Mr. Trump's ideas into his campaign. When Mr. Trump says, make America great again, Mr. Biden says, make in America. So clearly a lot of what Mr. Trump was saying, it still resonates with people. He has, if Mr. Biden has won this election, it had not been a sweeping mandate for Mr. Biden as well. So clearly for Mr. Trump, there's this idea that he has been successful in challenging the fundamental assumptions of American politics, and has been core to his support base and has been he has been able to use that to mobilize the support base. And even today, when Mr. Trump is losing left, right, and center, the Georgia elections are a case in point. Even then, he could get people who could come in large numbers to his rallies. Tells you a different story about America, that something is going on in the societal landscape, which I think both sides, Republicans and Democrats, need to recognize and need to do something about their institutional fabric. Because if the faith in the institutions goes down like it has been happening over the last few years, then I'm afraid this is just the start. This is just the beginning, and it may very well continue for a long time.
Ambassador, let me bring that question to you. If a lot of Americans believe that the current system is fraudulent, do you think it's time that America needs to move beyond that electoral college system to a more uniform and an independent system of elections which people trust?
Well, there is a lot that is wrong with the electoral college system, and American political analysts also concede this fact. For one thing, this system of winner take all means that if in a particular state party A wins 51% and party B gets 49%, then party A will take all the states from that state. So in other words, there is something inbuilt in the electoral college system which distorts the representation of votes which are given to a particular candidate. There are also various other faults within this system. However, bringing about any change in the electoral college system is not going to be easy, because it will require a major amendment to the US Constitution. And I think that the groundwork for that has not been done. America is not yet ready for such a major overhaul. At the same time, to come down to your question of the sort of misgivings which exist within American society, what is it that is causing the divide? Let me mention that there are various reasons for this. First of all, there is this underlying issue relating to employment, or rather unemployment. A large number of white people in America feel that their jobs are being taken away. There is no denying this fact. During the 4.5 years that I spent in New York as Consul General, many people had the audacity to say this to my face, that Indians are coming here and taking away our jobs. Conversely, there is a lot of resentment for manufacturing jobs being taken away by China, companies from the United States locating manufacturing facilities away from the United States and in China, and also to some extent in other places like Mexico. So there is, rightly or wrongly, a perception that American jobs are going to other people. Donald Trump had promised to his voter base that he would bring back American jobs, and he had given them that hope that America would do without outsourcing jobs or bringing in workers from other countries. So that strengthened his particular voter base in that direction. There is, of course, a brimming issue of racial division in any case within American society. Black Lives Matter is a manifestation of the deeply held resentment within the black community in the United States. The white supremacist movement has been raising its ugly head from time to time in various parts of America. So this racial question is also something that is beginning to be a divisive force in America. When a political party tries to gain voter support from a particular group of people, naturally divisiveness grows. And I think all said and done, Donald Trump was responsible for fomenting racial disturbances. The white supremacist movements that took place, sometimes they turned violent, but rather than condemn them at any point, Donald Trump kept referring to them as very nice people.
Perhaps these
In
were
fact,
issues that resonated with people. Perhaps these were issues that his supporters really wanted to be raked up in the country. Mr. Chaudhary, coming back to the process of transition of power, how does presidential transition work in the United States?
Well, it seems to, I mean, it's pretty much as it's unrolling right now. You have an election which is effectively 51 smaller elections taking place across all the states in Washington. That results in a set of so-called electors being chosen who vote on the basis of whoever won a majority, in most of the states anyway, majority of the votes cast. We saw basically today, last night in America, that electoral college meeting and casting the votes, and in this case, obviously, Biden won. That is really the last major constitutional step left to declare a president, and officially now Biden has become the next US president. And the final act, which is to some degree symbolic, is that he then takes the oath of office 14 days from now. And at that point, Trump officially ceases to be president of the United States. And Trump has said he will leave. Even if he had said, I would not leave the White House, automatically all the trappings of power would have disappeared. People would have no longer taken his phone calls. He would have been blocked from entering the White House or other places. He would have been, the nuclear arsenal button, everything would have been taken away from him. So automatically that would happen, even if he were to try to resist handing over power to Biden. But as it is, it seems he will walk away. And then basically Biden is in charge. Normally, in the United States, you would have already had a huge number of meetings being held between the various government departments and agencies. The new CIA would be talking to the old one, the Defense Department. All the ministries would have begun the transition talks about handing over files, discussing what are the major topics to be concerned about, what are the dangers, threats, and so on. That's been a bit disrupted because Trump has sort of switched that on and off, depending on how much he feels happy about working with the Biden team. But I suspect over the next 14 days, you'll see a bit of an acceleration on that front. But that's basically it. And that, you are at that point, the president of America is now the present president. Trump is president only in name. And the Biden administration can almost be said to have effectively begun.
Professor, the transition period is supposed to promote an orderly transfer from the outgoing president to the incoming president. Now, if it doesn't serve the purpose that it's meant to, should this interval period be done away with and instead follow a system which other democracies follow? For example, what's being done in India, where the transition of power has so far been quite prompt and harmonious without any hiccups?
Well, there are pros and cons for both. And I think the American system has been, as Pramit pointed out, when you have an outgoing president and you have an incumbent, the two teams interact with each other, and there is a time that the time that is there between the elections and between the election night and the inauguration in January, that allows the incoming team to understand the issues, to understand the processes, and to make sure the time is available to the president-elect to have his own team in place, with certain degree of deliberation, and the top level cabinet, the top level postings in the bureaucracy. They are all political positions in some ways in America, unlike some in India, where the bureaucracy continues to run the country, and the power transition happens more seamlessly overnight. So I think there are advantages of the processes that are in place in America, but certainly with Trump, everything has been questioned, and so so one can look at the possibility that if this this had not happened, what would have happened. But in this case in particular, Tina, you have to go back and see that Mr. Trump was disputing the election right from the word go. So it was not as if he was willing to concede. Even if the transition, I think if the transition were the next day, for example, it took us a while to understand the election results, even this year. So, for example, we had to wait for 8 to 10 days before the results were out and before the results were declared. And so clearly the questions, I think, about the efficacy of the result, and one can also look at the Indian example. When Americans were voting for their president, India was voting in Bihar elections, and Bihar results were out much earlier. And with a greater degree of accuracy, the government was formed, and the government was, is now well into its second or third month. So clearly, I think the challenges for America are also more than just trying to look at the bigger issues. They're also about, how do you run these elections, which have become sort of a butt of ridicule in many ways around the world, and especially in this year or last year. So what we have been witnessing from November till January, it has been one long drawn out process which Mr. Trump exploited to his advantage, or rather disadvantage. And I think what we have seen is that American democracy has been looking rather shabby at the end of that process. But there are bigger questions about electoral college reforms, questions about larger reforms in the system, which perhaps will need to be addressed as America looks forward in trying to rejuvenate the fundamentals of their economic structure, of their political structures, which I think if you go by the media discussion, if you go by the political discussion, that is very much the focal point of attention at the moment.
Ambassador Dayal, one concluding remark from you on what America needs to do in terms of reforms so that the situation, the state that it is in currently, doesn't happen in future as well?
Well, Tina, Lord Acton had said, it is not the system, but who run the system that matter. The American system has generally functioned quite all right. It is only in this particular instance that we have noted this glaring sort of problem arising where the entire election process has been called into question, and where the losing candidate, who is the sitting incumbent, is claiming that the election was stolen from him. So a lot has to do with the personality of President Trump, who is, I'm afraid, an egoist. And he is someone who cannot accept defeat. So it is not the system, but the people who are part of the system, who are running the system, who make all the difference. In this particular instance, as I said, it is the personality of President Trump which has created all the problems. He has incited people who are part of his voter base to be violent.